Brandon Ingram. It feels like forever that Brandon Ingram was traded there, and for a while Brandon Ingram was the leader of this team because Zion was always hurt and he was the reliable guy. Last year or so, opinion on that kind of flipped. Injuries and inconsistencies haven't done him any favors. Now, Mark Stein of the Stein Lions reporting that the Raptors could be interested in Brandon Ingram. And if you're wondering why would the Raptors be interested in Brandon Ingram, I think it's more so the fact that I think the Raptors might have something that the Pelicans have interest in that they might want to acquire for next season, or they know that Brandon Ingram's leaving. I told you guys earlier, got some media buddies in California, specifically LA. One of them was recently at a game and he was just telling me, I'm not going to tell you who and who we're talking, but they were talking about Brandon Ingram's future, and they're pretty relevant people to Brandon Ingram's future. Basically what they said was it's probably going to be a sign and trade in the offseason. He's going to probably play out the rest of the year and get signed and traded somewhere else to a team that wants to pay him. A, there's not many teams in free agency with the salary cap to sign him that are worth signing. B, teams have more flexibility and access to draft capital in the offseason than they do right now to trade for Brandon Ingram in a sign and trade situation. So with those two factors being accounted for, the Toronto Raptors are emerging as suitors for Brandon Ingram, according to Mark Stein. And I find that interesting because Ingram's been on the block since the offseason, and Ingram and the Pelicans have discussed an extension, but they're apart. Ingram is in the final season of his contract. He's getting paid $36 million. The Pelicans are willing to give him a raise. They thought a raise would be $40 million a year. He wants a max. Masai Ujiri is motivated to quickly end this rebuild and get the Raptors back to the playoffs, as the Raptors reset their team last year when they traded OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam for a combination of players that resulted in RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, ending up in Toronto. You can throw in Kelly Olynyk in there. And the Raptors have been talking about other players, Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher, and Davion Mitchell in trades. So Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk packaged together would get the deal done very easily for the Raptors, and they probably wouldn't have to give up very minimal draft capital. In trading for Ingram now, the Raptors would get themselves a proven scorer next to Scotty Barnes, which is something they've been reported to want to do, while also still effectively maintaining a good probability of landing a top 10 pick in this year's draft that could give them a good role player, and they could go into next season having a starting lineup of Jakob Poeltl, Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett with Grady Dick and Ochai Agbaji, whoever they draft in the top 10, if they keep Chris Boucher or Davion Mitchell. All things that I think that would very much interest the Raptors. Now let's go ahead and just show you guys what that trade would look like. I think it's definitely interesting as the Raptors could really get themselves Brandon Ingram for cheap. But again, if they are being lowballed, I would rather just be the Pelicans and just, hey, if you're just trying to offer me pennies on the dollar and I have to take the risk of losing him or getting pennies on the dollar, just getting deals that I don't want, maybe just go into the sign and trade, like go take risk going into the free agency and looking for that sign and trade that may or may not be there instead of just taking a deal you don't like. That is something you can do. But again, I think Brandon Ingram, Bruce Brown, I would love Jakob Poeltl to go to the Pelicans, but that's not happening. Kelly Olynyk can make sense. If you didn't want Kelly Olynyk, you could do Chris Boucher. But Kelly Olynyk just makes sense. You could then probably say like a first round pick. So in this situation, they have Indiana's 2026 top 4 protected. And there you go. The Raptors are $8.9 million under, and they only increased by $200,000 in salary, while the Pelicans saved $200,000 in salary, and they're both hard capped at the first apron, but still have space of $4 million of first apron space and 10.8. So it's barely affects the team's salary. You give up a pick that's not going to affect you. I don't see another deal that makes any sense for the Raptors to do. Like, you're not trading anybody else on this roster. Like I said, the only other person that makes sense is Chris Boucher. But you're just giving them cap flexibility. And if they wanted, they could maybe expand this deal to a bigger one, and you send Bruce Brown somewhere else to a team that maybe has more interest or more willingness to resign or trade, or not trade, but I guess give up assets for him and then keep him, or a team like the Nets who will buy him out. That's always something. So that's one that I think is interesting. What do you guys think? Also, I don't know how that happened. I pressed the wrong button. Now, what do you guys think with the trade deadline being officially 8 days? I guess it's a week, but like, we're gonna go 8 days from occurring. I think we're in a position where, yeah, it's going to be either really boring or exciting. I just am wondering if De'Aaron Fox will get traded. That's the one. I think Jimmy's the only guy for sure. Yeah, what I find the most interesting about the whole Jimmy situation is, like, Jimmy Butler, by the way, guys, is not, and we already said it once, but he's not going to be bringing in the haul that people might be thinking that he would typically, just because of the way everything's played out. People know that the Heat don't have as much leverage, and that they're trying to move off of this sooner rather than later. So to me, I just think if you're a team, you know that the closer you get to February 6th, the more desperate they'll get. And yeah, I'm very curious. And wow, they're doing a 2-day draft again. I honestly thought it was a failure, so I'm surprised that they're doing it again. Now, outside of that, I don't have anything else to really report on that we could talk about. I feel like we talked about everything else that occurred. Okay, so allegedly now Bradley Beal will not waive his no trade clause to go to Chicago. So that one has also been put out, and that's definitely interesting. You would think that Chicago would have worked out. Billy Donovan was his college coach, and it's kind of a situation where you think he could just rehabilitate his image and maybe be viewed as a more valuable player, and kind of like Zach LaVine did. But I also don't know how much all of this stuff is true that we're hearing about Bradley Beal, because a lot of it is what we've said, posturing.